Thank you, June. All right, we're going to give it a minute so that folks that are just let in right now can get connected. Okay. All right, good afternoon, folks. I know it's just a few minutes past the hour. And just before we even get started, I do want to acknowledge, and this is just, I think I saw a note about this and didn't really get to reflect on this, but tonight is Yom Kippur, is the beginning. You know, this evening starts the beginning of Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Judaism. So I just want to acknowledge that and apologize for I think in the haste to keep this conversation moving, but apologize for scheduling this meeting this evening. So, but I want to also welcome you all. I think in our internal files, I will just acknowledge that this is our. Let me see here. This is, and I'm missing my. Let me not get in. This is our. This is our 46th meeting as a committee. So just congratulations for getting that point. We've had a lot of meetings, and so for today it is an abbreviated meeting, which I think you all and certainly we can appreciate. And so we're just going to keep this tight today. We're going to go around in a second. We're just going to do the virtual participation check, and then we'll go around, do a round of introductions and go over the agenda. Okay. So just for folks here today, this committee meeting is open to the public. I see a few folks here joining us via Zoom, but it is also being live streamed to YouTube. So for folks via YouTube that do want to provide public comment, you do need to join via Zoom. Public comment will be invited in a minute. We're running a couple minutes behind here. Just want to acknowledge there's going to be other opportunities for public engagement in other forums as well. Now, chat box is going to be open for introductions for folks that are joining remotely. Please, or that are joining us as guests and the members of the public, please feel free to introduce yourselves via the chat box. Otherwise, that's what it should be used for. For committee members, please feel free to use the raise hand function in order so that we can call on you all as we go through this meeting this evening. We do ask that for committee members that are comfortable with it, and obviously take a break when you need to, that committee members and speakers or guests and staff members that have an active role turn their cameras on. Otherwise, we do ask that for guests joining us this evening, we do ask that you turn your cameras off. The microphone will be open for members of the public. We will unmute it if you all want to provide public comment, but otherwise it will be closed. And this meeting is being recorded. And lastly, this evening we don't have our traditional captioner with us this evening. We are using the sort of automatic captioning function. And so if you do want to access that, you just need to go down on the bottom of your screen. There's usually the 3 dots or a place where it says captioning. You can select that and say show subtitle. And so that will allow you to see the captions. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to just do a round of introductions. I'll start with a call on committee members and go around with committee members. And then I'll go to staff members. And I'll start with the first person to my right, which is Jeffrey.
Hi, everyone. Jeffrey Moreland, he, him pronouns, committee member.
Right. Next up on my right is Michael.
Michael Eden Hill, he, him pronouns, committee member.
Hey.
Hi, everyone. Faith Graham, she, her, a committee member.
Shanice.
Hi, everyone. Shanice Clark, she, her, committee member.
Robin.
Good evening, Robin Wang, committee member, he, him.
Robin Ranfis.
Hello, everyone. Ranfis Giannatino Viatoro, he, him, committee member.
Okay. Maria.
Maria Sippin, she or they pronouns, committee member.
Okay. And Amanda will be joining us just a little bit later here shortly. I'll go ahead and turn it around to staff. James.
Everybody, James Valdez, he, him pronouns, and PCEF staff member.
James. We got June.
Good evening, everyone. My name is June. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be the tech lead. So if you need anything, feel free to message me.
And David.
Hello, I'm David Granfield, PCEF staff member and your fearless note taker tonight.
Thank you, David. And we've got several others here with us this evening. And so I'm going to just look at the chat box and call on others. And we've got a guest here. And so also want to just acknowledge we've got Jana, and I'm going to ask you to pronounce your last name again for me. I'm sorry.
That's
from
okay.
the Bureau of Emergency Management.
Jana Papa Eftimiou.
Okay. Thank you, Jana. And I think we're just letting in Kim McCarthy, and I'm not sure I pronounced it right, but Kim, please, I know that you're going to be a guest we're going to introduce later today, so please feel free to introduce yourself too, if you can.
Good evening, it's Kim McCarty, she, her pronouns. I'm Executive Director at the Community Alliance of Tenants. Nice to see you, Stan.
It's great to see you, thank you. And then we've got a handful of folks from the audience here. We've got Gail Palmer from the East Portland Resilience Coalition and the Centennial Community Association. We've got Katie, PCEF staff, as you all know. We've got David here with us, and we've got Jason Ford, PCEF staff as well here with us. Okay. With that, I'm gonna go ahead and just move to the agenda. Is gonna be brief so that we can get through the content, but just wanna see first that we're gonna go through, we did the introductions, we'll do public comment, and we're gonna jump into the discussion, which is a continuation of the discussion we had last week on Friday. And so that's what we'll pick up on, and we've got a couple invited speakers for that discussion. Now, just before I continue, I want to just check in with members of the public that are joining us, and I want to see if anyone would like to provide public comment. Please just either raise your hand or indicate that you're interested in providing public comment via the chat box. We'll keep an eye on that in case that interest comes up. So without that, I'm going to go ahead and just acknowledge this is a conversation that it's a different conversation than we're used to having within the committee. And we last week on Friday was your first sort of really viewing of the proposals we've been drafting, and it's still, as you all saw, it's still very much in this place where it's still, the Jello hasn't fully set yet, and there's a lot of details that we're still teasing out. But I know you all asked a range of great questions, and so we wanted to just start with bringing Jana on board in part so that you all could hear from Jana at the Bureau of Emergency Management to hear a little bit of some of the work that they're doing around emergency response, as some of those questions did come up. And then we want to turn it over afterwards to Kim McCarty over at the Community Alliance of Tenants to also just share some of their perspective before we jump back into the discussion. And generally, I mean, I think I'm going to jump ahead a couple slides to speak to what the discussion points were, but it was really this conversation around greenhouse gas emissions, energy bill impacts, PCEF's role versus other organizations and institutions, just direct community feedback, and then getting an understanding of the funding picture. And so we'll come back to that and dig into that further, but I wanted to first start with inviting Jana to speak, and then we'll turn it over to Kim. Works.
Great,
So
thank you very
much. You have slides, so.
I do.
Yeah.
Do you mind pulling them up for me?
Yep.
Awesome. So my name is Jana Papa Eftimiou, and I am the Chief Resilience Officer and currently also the Interim Director at the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. And Sam and I have been in conversation off and on for quite a while about the relationship between emergency management and the work of PCEF, because so much of what we do is driven by climate change and also is in service to underserved communities that we know are most impacted by, they're at the front lines of every disaster. And so I had heard from him about the proposal, a little bit about the proposal he talked about last week, and he shared with me that there was a desire to kind of understand more broadly how this fit into the city's emergency response for heat, and also to kind of clarify roles for the Bureau of Emergency Management versus what the Housing Bureau might do, or you might do, or others might do. So this presentation is intended to provide some more information that would answer those questions, and I'm going to run through it relatively quickly, I hope, so, to leave time for a discussion, but please interrupt me at any time if you have questions about something that's coming up here, but otherwise I won't. I'm just going to kind of share some information that I hope is helpful. And I'll describe the sides a little bit because I know at least one committee member is calling in. I can't see them also. But let's see. The Bureau of Emergency Management is our mission is to build a resilient Portland, to center our work and service to communities at the front lines of disasters, and to do that work by coordinating the city's planning for emergency response, and then to coordinate the city's emergency response when it happens, and to coordinate for recovery. So that's what we're about. Can you show the next slide, please? Thanks. So for all that important work that we do, we are 0.1% of the city's budget. So we're relatively small as far as city bureaus go, but I feel like we do a lot with the resources that we have. Next slide, please. Of our resources, nearly half of them are part of the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization, which those are basically Homeland Security funds those are 100% grant funded, and they do work to build resilience at the regional level, so coordinating between Columbia, Clark, Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah counties. And so we've done a little bit of work on heat at the policy level with that big group, but that group that is actually like half our budget can't really be used for response. It cannot be used for response efforts in the city of Portland. So the other part of the budget is where we do our work, and we spend a little bit on planning. As you can see, we do a little bit on community programs, but it's actually a lot for a bureau our size, and we have more emergency management community outreach staff than any other agency in Oregon, even the state emergency management agency. And the reason for that is, I think, in large part, our commitment to be doing our work in partnership with community. We also, am super proud, have the largest emergency volunteer program in the entire United States. We have more than 2,400 active volunteers that have completed 30 hours of training and do at least 12 hours of service a year, and that are, many of them attend like weekly online meetings, and just really a strong community of volunteers that want to be in service to their community in a disaster. And we have active teams at this point in every neighborhood in Portland. So that's a big focus for us. We also do emergency operations. We have only 4 full-time staff that do emergency ops, but when the city has a disaster, employees from all bureaus across the city come to work in the city's emergency coordination center to respond to heat or snow or flooding or whatever's happening. So we borrow employees from Parks and PBOT and every bureau to come and do the work, and those 4 folks are like the folks that train them and coordinate them to do that. And then on the admin side, that's just kind of the infrastructure of having a bureau. That's literally like our rent and our phones and utilities like that. So that's kind of like the resources that we have and the work that we do. Do you want a next slide, please? So I talked this a little bit already, but we have this RDPO, and that's hosting a regional organization and organizational infrastructure. We do have a 24/7 like emergency on-call response function. So there's always someone from the bureau that can be reached to assist with stuff, emergencies that come up unexpectedly, and that a lot of our resources go also towards just supporting that 24/7 availability. Next slide, please. In terms of planning, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we have a library of response plans. So we have a plan for flood and for earthquake and severe heat and severe cold. And we also do operational continuity planning for the city. So an important focus for us is how the city can continue its own operations in an emergency. Like, how do we keep supplying water? How do we keep, keep paying employees in a disaster? Like those focuses for us. And then, as I said, we have the largest emergency volunteer program. We also do a lot of, we work to do a lot of direct outreach to residents, and that we specifically focus our paid outreach resources on Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. Although that's been tough in the last year, frankly. We did a lot of in-person events that we haven't been able to do. A lot of our energy also has been turned from that to doing direct assistance to communities that are struggling economically to get through COVID. So we don't do like, we're not a public health agency, but we've been doing food boxes and diapers and stuff like that in partnership with community-based organizations. Next slide, please. So that's the work that we do, and these are the emergencies we plan for. I hope that you already knew that these were a possibility. I don't want to scare anybody, but things can go wrong in Portland. It can get really hot, which we saw this year. We also spent a lot of time on earthquakes. We do severe cold, which folks in this group probably know. For folks that are housed, severe cold is not often a life-threatening event. For people who are houseless or who have very tenuous living situations, it definitely can be. We also plan for floods, which is We've had 500-year floods in the last 100 years in Portland, so they're becoming frequent. Landslides, it's actually probably annually the most damaging event in Portland. We see millions of dollars of landslide damage every year in the city of Portland, but most of it is on private property, and it's in affluent neighborhoods like in the West Hills where people just pay for it out of their insurance, so the city doesn't have to eat those costs, but it happens a lot. There's also, we plan for wildland fire and smoke, and for infrastructure failures, things that we build that break, sinkholes, water main breaks, dam failures, stuff like that. Unfortunately, there are human-caused events like hazardous material spills, and then, yes, cyber terror, which hopefully we won't talk anymore about. But those are all the things that's kind of on our plate for the resources that we have. Next slide, please. So we are, so of all those hazards I mentioned, unfortunately, a lot of them are increased by climate change, which I'm sure this group has thought a lot of, it's probably thought of, but river flooding is increasing because of climate change, particularly in the transition period, where we're still getting big snowpack in the winter sometimes, but then getting a warm rain early in the season. So we expect to see more Columbia and Willamette River flooding in the next 50 years, probably, than we have seen in the past. As we see those bigger rain events in the city, we also see stream flooding, like where streets flood and basements flood. That's something that's a nuisance to a lot of people, but for folks that don't have property insurance or that are renters and don't have renters insurance, a basement flooding can be really it can be a loss that they can't afford. Landslides go up because those rain events are going up. We see more fires. We've seen, as we saw last summer, horrible smoke air quality incidents that are increasing, and then we're extreme heat, which is the most deadly weather event in Portland, the most deadly natural disaster. The incident we saw this summer was the largest mass casualty event in our area since white settlement, so it's really huge. And actually, nationally, heat is the biggest killer. Although we often, see tornadoes and hurricanes and stuff in the news, extreme heat kills more people annually in the United States than anything else. And if you saw the New York Times today, they're even reporting that the hurricane that hit New Orleans last week, it killed 4 people with the flooding and the storm surge, and another 11 people died in the heat that followed because there was power outages and their AC didn't work. So it just really, unfortunately, is a pattern across the country that extreme heat is unexpectedly, perhaps it's terrible. Next slide, please. So what are we doing about it? Because it's terrible. We own the mitigation plans, which is like our plans to reduce our risk exposure over time. These are citywide plans that PBEM kind of convenes, but sounds simple, but like a really important strategy is tree planting and reducing those heat islands around the city, because we know heat is not evenly distributed. Neighborhoods that have a lot of street trees and parks and like natural amenities can be 20, 30, or even 40 degrees cooler than neighborhoods that have a lot of pavement and don't have street trees and don't have those parks and open spaces that are cooling. And so adding trees in natural areas to the neighborhoods that are disproportionately burdened by heat is a really important strategy long term that we promote, and that's done mostly by like parks and BES. White roofs is another strategy that helps reduce heat islands. It's something that we're looking for ways to promote, and there are other urban design stuff that probably folks from BPS could explain more about, but how we can design new developments to reduce the impacts of heat on residents. Other sort of big strategies that we work on would include like HVAC upgrades at public buildings. So trying to have like parks or parks community centers and other places where people would go have better HVAC. And then sort of advocating on policy, like having TriMet give people free rides. Next slide, please. So those are the things that we do when like long range to reduce our exposure to heat. And then when it gets really hot, we go into response mode. We spend a lot of time on street outreach, directly reaching out to people who are impacted by heat in partnership with the Joint Office of Homeless Services and with volunteers. We set up cooling spaces in libraries and community centers, the Portland Building, places like that. Not everyone wants to come to a public building or a government building, so we also have started setting up misting stations in parks where people can cool off. And also that helps us reach neighborhoods where we don't have a community center that's easy to reach. We've also partnered with community-based organizations to do pop-up cooling centers. like at churches and community centers, and we have air conditioning units to loan and do small grants to pay people back for like snacks and cleaning, whatever costs they incur to do that. We do robocalls and emergency alerts to tell people about heat, and then we use our volunteer corps to do welfare checks and check on the well-being of people, particularly like into subsidized housing that we know don't have 8C. So we call them, and if nobody answers, we go and check on them. Those are kind of all our strategies. Next slide, please. That I hope provides sort of some context for the work that our Bureau does, and kind of how the severe heat stuff fits and climate change generally fits into our strategies to keep Portlanders safe in heat emergencies. And I hope that's helpful in kind of framing the proposal that you've looked at in the context of the work the city does. And with that, I will just close and be happy to answer questions or listen to your dialogue. Thank you.
I might ask that we hold questions until Kim goes,
Oh,
and then give
right.
an opportunity
Sorry.
for questions. That's
Thanks.
okay, just so that way we can consolidate the questions. And then I'm going to do another call for public comments shortly. It's going to be a little bit out of rhythm, but I think I'm getting a ping that someone may want to provide public comment. So if you do want to provide public comment, what I'd ask is please indicate it via the chat box. And then what we'll do is, after at least Kim shortly presents, we'll give an opportunity. A lot of sequence, but Kim, you've got the floor here if you're still with us.
Hi, I couldn't hear you. Start.
Please, I wanted to invite you, Kim, to go ahead and just share any reflections that I think I know we've been in conversation with you around extreme heat, some of the work that you all have done, and want to just invite you to speak to some of the work that you all have done in this area.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Just wanted to share with you the conversations that our tenants have been having in response to this extreme heat event. As I said earlier, I'm executive director at the Community Alliance of Tenants. Community Alliance of Tenants is a membership-based organization. Our members are all tenants, primarily low income, throughout the state of Oregon, and we've been around for over 25 years. And in these conversations, we were all taken by surprise by the extreme heat and the impact that it had, but it also was not unexpected. We've been advocating for years that tenants be allowed to have air conditioning in their units. And you may or may not be aware that that's not really a right of tenants in the state of Oregon. It has to be negotiated as an accommodation instead of an expectation that that's something that everyone would have the right to. Additionally, some of the observations that we had this year is that because of COVID, a lot of people are isolated, and even more so because of COVID. And as those individuals, and especially in our public housing buildings or single family buildings, where we found that because of COVID, there was less, there are fewer managers on site. So there are fewer people who are aware of the conditions, and not just heat conditions, any kind of condition of the building as a whole, but all the environmental conditions. But in this case, the heat was deadly. And so in many instances, no one may have been aware that the inside temperature in someone's unit was over 100 degrees. Many tenants, just to share some of the stories that we heard, tenants with these extreme heat conditions, where there was awareness of how dangerous it was. Of course, they tried to get out of their unit and seek shelter. Pets were ill, people were hospitalized, and we know that there were many deaths throughout Oregon. And then to let you know some of the things that we've been doing as an organization, one is to have these conversations with tenants to bring to the surface what they believe are some of the solutions, to understand what some of the barriers are. And then we've also, because of our relationship with our tenant members, we have a really direct conduit. So throughout COVID, we've been doing mutual aid as well, delivering food boxes, trying to get people to help each other. So we know that there's a need and an infrastructure in place in terms of our contact with buildings and with individuals that are in our membership, that we can get some of these services, knowledge or equipment to folks, just as we have with other items. And then in terms of the policy work, people are asking, our members are asking, couldn't there be a policy where landlords would have to accommodate someone who requested air conditioning, you know, without having to go through extra hoops of asking for a doctor's note or something else? Could there be a way to get the type of airflow, air conditioning, or other accommodations to tenants that are low cost, low barrier, and don't even require any kind of consultation with the landlord, given that we don't know that when we'll be able to change the legal framework in that regard. We've also have wondered, you know, could there be more said to property owners to take more ownership of the conditions in their building, like knowing, monitoring the air quality, the temperature, even if they had to do it remotely, being responsible for creating a space where people could come together, either to be warmed if there's, you know, by having a generator for when there's a need for warming conditions, or by having some kind of cooling in a centralized place when there's a need for cooling conditions. And then, you know, recognizing that this year it was, there were exceptions because you didn't want to bring people too close together because of COVID. So these are some of the observations, and I just wanted to be available for questions about what our tenants have observed and shared with us, and some of the solutions that they are promoting.
Thank you. Can folks hear me? Yeah, good. Kim, I just want to thank you, and at this point, I'd love to just open up the floor. I know we've got a discussion out here, but I want to open the floor to both Kim and Jana to see just for committee members and questions you all may have of them, and then see where we get there, and then pivot to the discussion that the continuation discussion that we had last week.
I just want to thank you all for your and in coming on to the meeting. The committee had a lot of interest in learning more about this bureau and the relationships with PCEF and your work. So I think this is just an important dialogue to have. I don't have any specific questions. I think some of your bullet points help me better understand, like, some of the limited resources you all are running on, and you know, I think the greater need across the city for evolving that work, as well as creating more relationships with PCEF.
Thank you. I would just say that that Community Alliance of Tenants had actually been a great partner to PBEM too, and some of the food box programs that I mentioned were done in partnership with the Community Alliance of Tenants, and they also provided a great training to our bureau about how, as they're doing that, they can also be informing tenants about their rights and how to get rental assistance. So CAT's been a great organization to work with too.
Thank you.
So I'm just acknowledging that I don't see hands anymore or anything with Zoom in terms of, so I'm gonna, if others do, for whatever reason, my Zoom started acting
I
up.
see Michael's hand up.
Give it to you. Thank you.
So I had a question for Kim. Kim, you know that we're looking at this heat hazard response concept for responding to doing a sort of an emergency response to this last heat event, knowing that they're going to continue on in the future. I was wondering if you had any kind of feedback about it as a community organization that is on the ground doing this work, or any concerns too.
Yeah. Well, if one of the objectives is to, to warehouse the materials and share them with folks in need, I hope that you will be able to find partnerships. I think of folks like Friendly House, the food bank, Oregon Food Bank, some of these kinds of partners. We also want to work with them because we need to get information out, as Jonah mentioned, about tenant rights, and I think there's just always opportunities to partner and reinforce the work that multiple agencies and groups are doing.
Robin.
You have your hand raised. Go ahead.
A follow-up question on that. Last time we had a discussion, the point was raised that it's one thing to distribute these cooling equipments, but they require energy, and there was a conversation around energy burden, electricity burden on the folks that might be benefiting from these devices. Can you comment on whether that's a concern that we should be considering? And I think the flip side is let's say someone gets this equipment and it's hot out, maybe not 112 degrees hot, but it's 95 degrees hot. It's still pretty hot. They turn it on and then maybe get a surprise electricity bill. So kind of curious from that perspective, is this something that could end up doing more harm than good?
We heard the heartbreaking stories of individuals who made choices to not get air conditioning, or even if they had it, to not turn it on for that very reason, that they were afraid of the expense. So I think it definitely needs to be kept in mind. I think that a lot could also be done to educate tenants about, what the relative expense would really be. Of course, I would hope that whatever type of device is promoted is very energy cost savings, or that there would be multiple pathways suggested for cooling. Some including fans or other cooling methodologies, and then there's a lot more that I think that our energy providers could be doing, especially in these critical times, to just forgive the expense of these energy bills, or to subsidize and make that a pretty straightforward way to offer that. And in the conversations that I've had, it sounds like we're not at a place where we can do that yet, but I strongly feel, and so do our members, that we should be.
Ranfis, I see your hand up.
Thanks. Appreciate you, Kim, and John should show up and present on this. I learned a lot more about PBIM, so thankful for that. Learned the budget size, so it's always a shock how low some of our bureaus are funded, but for such critical and important work. But I think, Kim, just some of the comments you just raised, I think just highlights again the importance of the overburden impacts of climate change on renters and low-income folks in our communities, and the tough decisions they have to make, and the tough decisions, like even just this discussion about providing AC or ductless heat pumps. It should be a no-brainer, and yet we're still discussing about the burdens or the challenges or the barriers to do that, and to install them in certain units, and the system changes that we need in our laws to do that, and the critical policies that we need for folks to forgive a basic utility to protect people's health during a extreme weather event. I do hope that when we, if and when we do make the allocation for funds, that this is seen as a challenge, for other institutions to do more, to do better. Like, again, like I think we are a drip in the bucket. Even if we make this investment, that I think we need the utilities to play a key role in ensuring that we're not overburdening people with expenses during a climate event. And we need to make sure that, you know, our affordable housing providers are making it easier and not creating barriers for tenants to have these installed, and likewise for just broader community, just in terms of like where our investments are going. Like, I would hope that we're changing and revising our landlord tenant laws to ensure that folks can install equipment that should be deemed essential, especially during a extreme climate event. So I don't have much more to say, but just appreciative so far of the comments and what you've highlighted so far, Kim, and just appreciative here. But I just wanted to sort of note, like, I think, you know, if and when we do make this investment, like, I think I hope this is a challenge for other institutions to step up, and hope that this is being paired with future federal investments in this space.
Thanks, Ramses. Were there any other committee member comments or questions directed to our visiting speakers, or did we want to get into some of the content of the memo and the proposal?
Sorry, this is Megan, and I can't raise my hand because I'm on the phone. So is it okay if I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm curious. I think this is probably a question for, now I've forgotten the name, but the person from regional planning or the disaster planning. And I'm curious if the data has been analyzed, or if we understand who was most negatively impacted, and I suppose I mean who died in the heat wave, and because it would help us might help us target our, if we move forward with this program, target it to the most vulnerable, you know, the people needing it most. It might give us a sense of like who needs it. I'm just curious what might have been learned from.
Oh
that.
yeah, I'm super glad you asked. We're still the details of the data are, we know in general. I wish we had more specifics, but also because of protecting the privacy, the people that passed away, we don't have all the details that we would like, but we have it by zip code. And we also know something about the demographics, and what we see is that very disproportionately it was people who are old, that were more than 70. It was people who obviously, or maybe not, but didn't have air conditioning or working air conditioning or a fan at their house. It was people who lived alone, who were at great risk. And then the two housing types that particularly seemed to have risk were people who lived in mobile homes and people who lived on the upper floors of apartment buildings, because it gets super hot and is hard to cool. And so yeah, so I think those, and also if you looking at the geographic data by zip code, it's a lot of people that live in heat islands, so like in outer east, or people who live right downtown that live in those high apartment buildings, and also downtown is really hot.
Thanks. Thank you. That seems like really good information to consider in the rollout of this and in guidance to some of our partners to be doing more distribution, like outreach.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I agree that that type of data can help us identify how to prioritize in distribution if this program moves forward. Let's see, other thoughts or questions? And Sam, we have you back here, so.
I'm connected again durably.
Just a follow-up question, given that you both are here, but well, I guess I guess more of a question for PBEM, but given that you have done plans for planning around severe heat events, I mean, I think does PBEM have a clear role to play around either leading or assisting with the distribution of the distribution installation of these devices?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. I mean, I would say my response maybe is similar to Kim's experiences. I feel like there are networks of in the community through culturally specific community-based organizations and through groups like Community Alliance of Tenants and through affordable housing providers that are the closest to the community and would know best how to serve that community or identify the people that are most at risk. PBEM would be happy to have a role, but I don't think I think our role would be to help connect to those networks or to help make sure those networks get plugged into this program, and then maybe also to see where we can bring together other support at the same time. Like you wouldn't have enough AC units for everybody, but if we can be a part of the effort of distributing them, then we can also think about well, can we also make sure that we're providing good if information to people that live in the building about heat safety and what to do if they don't feel safe and they're too hot and they don't have an AC unit, or can we promote BS to do street tree planning if a building says like they're really having a hard time, because that can make a difference just to cool the area around the building. Or like if we're getting a lot of requests from a neighborhood, then say like we really have to open a cooling center that's in the zip code to serve people there, to make sure that that the AC units, I think that there's other like people that do direct service that would be the right make the connection, but we can help make that be a part of a holistic program. So it leverages that work, if that makes sense.
I guess maybe a follow-up question to that, given I think the key role of working with those community groups. I mean, I think we're figuring out the investment in the procurement of these devices and starting to think about the distribution. But I guess question for you, Kim, is the organizational capacity there, is the support for community groups to play that role that John had mentioned is so critical. Even if you have an agency playing a role, but if we were looking at critical community organizations frontline community organizations playing that role, like is the support in the capacity there to do that?
I think it would really depend on the organization. So like in the case of CAT, we would have the capacity to work with the folks who are already part of our membership. So if we're working with a few buildings in Southwest Portland, and that represents 200 to 400 households, we would probably have capacity and network there. If we're talking about the whole city of Portland, probably not. And so that's why I say something like, Oregon Food Bank or Friendly House or it would probably be a combination effort of someone in the city, like they did with the food boxes, someone who's doing the coordinating and the procurement and the connecting to the other agencies. I think it would have to be some kind of structure like that.
If I can just add an unsolicited opinion too, with PBEM, we do rely on community-based organizations, but we also recognize we have to pay, we can't expect them to do work for free that we would otherwise pay a city employee to do. And but that when we prefer to work through community-based organizations and also support help support the overhead to make it possible for them to do the work. And there's like a double benefit in that, or a mini, right? Because then we're letting they can do it in a culturally responsive way that meets community needs, and also we're hopefully strengthening that organization and helping them build capacity so that they can take on other work too. So I think it's a good way to pay community-based organizations to do it.
Thank you all. Yeah, you'll to others, but yeah, I think you're kind of answering. I think what I'm getting at too is like if we need to think about organizational support on that. But yeah, I'll yield to others with their hands raised.
Gail, I see your hand, and if it's a brief comment, I know we might not have caught you in a public comment, so maybe I'm going to just go ahead, Gail, and call on you, hoping it'll be brief, because I do want to move the conversation to some of the discussion points that were brought up last week and address those more specifically. So, Gail, I'm going to go ahead. I'm calling on you.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a brief comment. And the comment is community organizations absolutely can do it, but the time is now to build the capacity of those organizations that are forming and existing to be able to do a adequate response during emergencies. And so I'll be interested in learning more about what the recommendations are, but that capacity building, certainly in Outer East here for our organizations, has really got to be enhanced now, if not sometime in the future when the emergency comes.
And Kim, I see your hand up too as a follow-up.
Yeah, I just wanted to modify my response a little bit. Thank you for recognizing my response was based on the capacity that we have today, you know, one organizer in the metro area. But it's certainly if our capacity and resources were increased, then our role could increase as would be the case for any community organization.
I want to, just as a reminder, James, if you could go to the back slide. This is just as a reminder for folks what we're asking. You know, there is, you know, today is really about this ask to, and there's a lot that we're going to learn, but it is about this, whether we, you know, whether there's interest within the committee to move forward with, we would in pretty short order drafting an RFP so that we can understand and gather interest and proposals from community partners that would be interested in distribution and installation of these units and providing other those services, education, those connections, those opportunities. We're going to have to come back to you all once we hear back, narrow that, and bring those partners back to us so you can select them. And so there's going to be a more refined conversation at that point around what we've learned as part of that. And then subsequently, we're going to have to come back as part of this conversation and also make an ask around selecting an equipment purchasing partner, as that's one of the key things driving these deadlines around making sure that we're getting in the supply chains and putting in a procurement order before December when we need to in order to have equipment delivered by spring. And so I'm going to move to the next slide. We've got about 10 minutes here, and so I'm just going to jog folks' memory. And we did send a memo in advance, but these were some of the feedback that came up last week. These were concerns around, you know, and the uncertainty around how this plays out both short-term and long-term around greenhouse gas emissions, the energy bill impacts, our role versus other organizations and institutions, just hearing more community feedback around this, and then the funding picture. And here we try to provide, you know, the acknowledgement is there's a good bit we still need to understand. And so this is our best guess as to we will come back with more refined numbers as part of putting out this RFP and hearing from organizations what are their particular needs in order to play this role, assuming they're interested. But wanted to also not leave you also, you all don't go so far out there and think about, so that we go so far out and come back to all the proposal that isn't in the ballpark or you all at least haven't considered. So these are wide ranges. I want to acknowledge that they're wide ranges for a range of reasons. And the memo certainly speaks to some of that, but just kind of pause here and see if any immediate questions came up for folks around this. And thoughts in response to the memo that we shared with you all yesterday, late yesterday. And I just also want to, Kim, thank you. Jana, thank you so much. Really appreciate you all being here on what was very short notice for you both, and just appreciate you all being here with us.
Robin, I see your hand.
Yeah, so I'm a little confused as to what is being asked of us. Last time we met on Friday, I thought we were discussing going to City Council and asking for an authorization for additional funds. Now you're asking us to approve an RFP.
What we want to do, Robin, apologies, and this is partially because this is different, and and I think we weren't as clear. What we want to do, starting really when we release the next RFP, and the timeline may be a little bit off, right? Is we want to pair it with, in parallel, it's a separate offering, and we're going to have to communicate that and figure out how to communicate that clearly. But we're going to be asking our community partners interested in also in the separate offering being equipment distribution and installation partners. Now, it's important you all have a sense for these budget figures because we're going to put that out there, hear back from folks, hear their proposals on what their cost estimates are going to be in order to do that work. And then we would come back to you and say, we've got a pool of 12 to 15 folks, whichever it is. This is their proposal and their interest in being an equipment distribution partner. Here are their costs. Here would be the budget over 3 to 5 years. Are you okay with it? And then we would go to City Council with that proposal as part of that action. With your, assuming if you all were able to make that recommendation to fund them, we would be asking them for we would ask them to also authorize additional funds as part of that same action. And so, but we don't want to put out an RFP that isn't aligned with your interests. And so it is important that we get sort of the go ahead from you all in order to do that, a request for proposals for those equipment distribution partners. Separately, we're going to come back to you all, assuming that there's interest in this, to ask for your permission, your go ahead to also contract with equipment purchasing partners, which is a different and distinct role. We're sort of parsing these into the equipment purchasing and then the equipment distribution partners. And we think on this side, there's certainly going to be a lot of varied interest from CDCs, community development corporations, affordable housing providers, as well as organizations like Community Alliance of Tenants and others that fall into that broader mold.
And so where do some of the other things that were raised come into play, like greenhouse gas reduction emissions, energy bill impacts? Those are not things that I think would be part of those RFPs, or maybe they are. I don't know. And then a second question is, let's say we do put out this RFP, we get proposals, and let's say we get $30 million worth of, or $40 million worth of proposals. Are we going to present all those proposals to the City Council?
There's going to be work to tease that out, Robin. It should be the bulk of what we expect the cost is going to fall on the equipment purchasing side. That's the procurement, the management, logistics of the equipment on this side. The distribution is going to be, and it's a much, I just want to be clear, this is a much more simple, and I think this is the important piece for us, a much more simple RFP that we're putting together in order to tease out those that are explicitly interested in distribution of equipment on a per unit cost basis. So it would be, and I think that the memo sort of speaks to some of that, but it would be narrower. So when it comes to bill impacts, I can turn it to James, but that's a conversation, there's longer term thinking and I think thoughts that we've shared around how we address bill impacts. But that is going to be, it's not necessarily something we can address in the near term, other than just elaborating what we think the bill impacts could be. As it relates to greenhouse gas emissions, I think that is an area where we want to hear from you. One option we certainly put out there is, I think in response to feedback we heard from you, is whether we would purchase renewable energy credits or offsets. And so that's an area that we can come back to, but it's important that we hear what that means for you all.
And maybe if I could jump in and address a few pieces directly. So on the energy bill impacts, we're still kind of evaluating and modeling what different costs might be. The most efficient versions of these units that provide cooling to a space that is like a small living room draw about 750 watts, and so that will have an impact depending on how much it's used and whether it's cycled on and off or whether it's running continually with other doors open and trying to cool the whole space. And so we've done a little bit of modeling that actually reduces our initial assumptions and is more, which is in the memo. And it really depends on how large the cooling unit is and the efficiency of that. In terms of bill mitigation approaches, we in the memo kind of have a little table there of different tools. There are some existing tools that we have now that are already kind of overburdened, like the energy assistance programs that the utility has, the kind of bill forgiveness elements. I agree with that critique that they're not doing enough to make those available. However, there will be a rulemaking next year, 2022, within the year around the creation of low-income energy rates for customers. That would be an opportunity to educate and sign people up for a low-income discounted rate, either in parallel with the distribution of equipment or afterwards once it's available, that could actually have a net reduction annually in their bill compared to even when accounting for the increased use. And so there's a lot of kind of pieces that could be coming or will be coming that we can't build in terms of a cost right away, because some of those are external to the program. Like the community solar program, which exists right now, would be a perfect pairing of offering energy reduction in the summer with the generation of solar somewhere else, not located on where the home is. And that program is also kind of just getting started. And so these are the pieces that we would explore with community partners to understand with different distribution partners which bill reduction approaches would work best for the people that they serve. Does that help frame elements of that?
It helps. I'm still not 100% clear what's being asked, what we're voting on today. But it sounds like this is going to be a continuing conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I recognize that there's still quite a bit that's evolving, but I guess what we're looking for direction on is the authority to go forward with and to create an RFP for the distribution partners at this point, and then create that framework for organizations to respond to. Or Sam, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. This is different than what we've done before, and it's in response to the timing of what it means to move and get something in place in next spring. So there's plenty of details that we don't have now, but what we don't want to do is put out an RFP and come back to you all with proposals for distribution partners if that's not where you all want to. So it is important that there is, generally speaking, some of those other details we're going to have to come back to. And it's in part, it's responding to the proposals we get and the interest and what folks want to do as part of their proposals for distribution. But if it is important that we get a decision from you all on whether you all want to move forward with this tonight in order to pair it with this next RFP, since we know that organizations are actively thinking about this sort of heat response. And our existing RFP framework does not necessarily incentivize these sorts of approaches. Our existing framework incentivizes deeper investments, a whole range of other investments, not this sort of approach. So it just is important that that you all think about that, because there is critical time constraints, and so there's continuing conversations around the bill impacts and other things. But I actually think that this is where we were hoping to have some clear direction from you all on whether to proceed with at least structuring an RFP that folks could respond to for the equipment distribution.
Sorry.
Yeah, Michael, I saw your, yeah.
Okay. My hand is kind of matching my background here. I'm realizing. I guess I had two things, which is in our memo, the cost of energy said $8 to $20 a year. I, for one, am just not believing those numbers. I don't know if anybody else here has air conditioning that they've run during the summer, and your bill has been $8 to $20 per year for running it. Mine is $8 a day. It's $140 a month to run my air conditioning in the summer. So, and I grant you it's a bigger system and it's more than 350 square feet. But even when I lived in a 350 square foot studio and had a window shaker, it was still $40 a month in the summer. So I'm not sure where the $8 to $20 per year is coming from realistically. I mean, I get that there's math, but it feels like, that's a perfectly insulated building with no windows north facing on the basement floor. It's so I do have cost of energy questions, and I have questions about training installers also, and if the installers are going to be from the community, speak the language in the community, all of those things. What our outreach looks like in a culturally responsive way. And I guess I'm gonna have to back Robin on this. I am kind of confused as to, it sounds like if we say go ahead right now, that we're fully committed to this. That there's no backing out of it as of right now. That we're gonna go ahead and do $7 to $15 million over the next 3 to 5 years, and we're committing to that, which I don't have a problem with, but it feels like we've got a lot of, I don't know, it feels like something that's infancy, and we're trying to like fund it in adulthood already, which is fine, I guess. But it does seem a little like there's a lot of questions to answer that we're approving with very kind of like nebulous in the ether answers.
Thank you, Michael. That's good faith. And I know, let me just, we're over by 4 minutes, and maybe I'd love to hear from Faith and just check in with folks and go around and see where folks are at. I think this is, let's hear from Faith maybe, and then we'll look to go around and just get a feel for where folks are at.
I'm a little all over the place, so I'm afraid I'm not going to be quite as articulate as I would hope to be. But I think initially what you were asking us last week, at least what I heard that we were being asked last week, is this aligned with PCEF's mission? Should we pursue this? And my answer is a wholehearted yes to that, and I'd love to hear what others think. I do think that this is climate action directed at the populations that we are supposed to be working to benefit through this program. And so in my mind, this squarely fits within our mission, and there's no one else stepping up to do it in the way that we can have a major impact. And I also think that it really does benefit the other pieces and parts of PCEF's mission and direction. Like, we will develop better community partners. We will understand how to these projects, we will incubate projects, and we'll also get more energy efficiency out of this programs for longer term, in addition to the immediate term and the short-term gains. So I'm all for that. I think the reason there's some of the hesitancy that I'm feeling, I really appreciated your question, Robin, because I wasn't exactly sure what we were being asked either, is in part because you've done so much legwork on trying to identify all of the issues. Like, staff has done so much work on figuring out what the best program is, but your RFP that you're going to put out might be the RFP to find out what the best solution is, right? That's what an RFP would generally be. You're looking for people to tell you what's the right program. So maybe what you're saying, maybe the ask is really to us, are you guys aligned that this is something that we can do if we get the right responses that address the concerns that have been raised? And if that's the question, I'm a yes, and I'd love you to put that out. But I think that what it means is we do have to have some definition around what the RFP will be. Because back to Michael's point, right now, if we put an RFP out that just said, we're going to fund 7 partners, but we don't have parameters on what it addresses, like that we've checked the box on the concerns that we've already identified, that probably is not, like, maybe it's an RFP to say, what's your great ideas? And that we want to take that back, but we first want to hear from the community, what are these great ideas to be a distribution partner? So my ask wasn't as strong either, right? It's not a clear yes or no, but I guess I do want to hear from the committee members. Do you feel like this is aligned? Should we proceed with more definition around what we're asking the community to respond to? Is that at all helpful?
That was. I want to go ahead and hear from other committee members, and maybe I'm just going to go around and call on others. I'm getting my daughter knocking at the door here. Maria.
Thanks. I love all the questions that have been asked because those are similar ones that I've kind of been sitting with since Friday. I do hear though why you're making this ask for us to put out the permission to move the RFP along. I think there's a lot of importance in the sequencing of this with the RFP that we're working on, and to make sure that we can get the distributors like on board sooner than later. But you know, I think there are a lot of unknowns that make us uncomfortable, that make me uncomfortable, and thinking that we still should work out a couple more details, hear more community input, even though I know staff has been working on a lot of that behind the scenes. I do see the urgency of this, and I want to support it and want to move it forward. Just want to know how much more time y'all need to answer some of our questions before it goes out. And you know, if you have the capacity to keep doing the research work that the committee is asking y'all to do.
Call on. I know that we've got Amanda here, and Amanda's on phone. Amanda, it's just *6 to unmute. Okay. I think I might be able to. *6 to unmute, Amanda. Amanda, we did just see you unmute. 9492, right? Oh, while we wait for Amanda to unmute, maybe I'm going to go ahead and call on Jeffrey, and then.
Yeah, I wasn't there Friday, so I wasn't there to get most of this information. But based on what I'm hearing, I do believe that this is, and we discussed this in the past too. I do believe this does align with what we're about as far as PCEF goes. But I do see the need for us to continue to get more information as well moving forward. If the way that Faith framed it is what staff is asking us, I am okay with moving that forward. But I do think there is a lot of good questions voiced by a lot of our committee members and people from the community that we do need to be very aware of and keep those conversations going if we do decide to go moving forward with this. Those are my thoughts.
Hi, this is Amanda.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, hi. Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm not sure why my volume wasn't working, but I just really want to say thank you again for this really well-rounded conversation. I think we're really hitting all the important points. And I definitely deeply resonate with everything Faith said, and also want to acknowledge that this is something that I think we really need to take our time on. I mean, I don't know how much of a sense of urgency that we do have on this matter. And I think just having that understanding as committee members would be important, because right now there's a lot of great conversations happening, but I feel like there's a deep sense of urgency, and we haven't really named a timeline at this point. But I think just hearing everything that's being, said in this conversation, I think there needs to be more conversation for us to really gain an understanding of I guess, what needs to be done. I hear there's a high need for this, and I understand that, and I want to support it. And also, I don't want us to make a wrong decision on something that's this big. And I think a big part of it is wanting to prepare for the worst, and I guess not wanting to be part of a decision that will harm us in the long run. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I think I just really appreciate a more conversation on this if possible.
Sam, you're muted or not connected to your.
Just want to see if Megan or Shanice want to share anything. I know we're over, and I just want to make sure we hear before. I've got a few thoughts, and so I want to think through that. And I want to also just, well, before I go ahead, Shanice or Megan.
I will offer some of what I'm reflecting on, and I think there's some similar things going on with me reflecting on what it is we are wanting to move forward with, and I know there's been kind of a, I think, deep understanding of the research and strategies that would be most helpful in these kinds of emergencies. And it's helpful to hear the perspectives of folks tonight as well, and some of the limitation there. And I'm just I'm kind of stuck thinking about the kind of point of why we exist and this limitation that's clearly there, and emergency kind of planning, and at I think a system-wide level of what I think on the short term that looks like. I'd like to remove a short term and long term commitments if possible, but I don't know if that's possible. But yeah, it would be great to have this conversation with more folks, and it just highlights and really underscores the impact of investing in communities of color, and how these different types of I think scenarios, these frontline communities and organizations that serve these communities are not resourced well enough for that resilient impact. And so, yeah, I'm curious about that long-term conversation that PCEF might be able to lead with other agencies, or I'm not sure, but in terms of this thing right here, I guess I'm just thinking about that long-term piece, hoping that it could be modified after we vote on this piece this evening. But yeah, or not vote on it this evening.
Thank you, Shanice. I know we committed to getting you all out early, but I do think it's important. I'd love to hear from Megan and Ramfis, and I can just share a thought on the path forward, recognizing that timing is going to be the hardest thing of this, and so it is. We will huddle as a team, but at least I know what I'll share is that we'll huddle and come up with a different strategy, but if we don't get to probably a decision in the October 6th meeting, I don't think we could move forward altogether with this kind of proposal. So I think we've got some thoughts here, but I do want to hear, and we can refine and get you a little more detail on what specifically the RFP questions would look like. But I want to just now hear from maybe Megan and Ramfis, and might ask that we close out the meeting and come back October 6th, because as I don't necessarily get a sense that the group is going to be there this evening.
Hi, yeah, Megan here, y'all. And I'm appreciating the good conversation and the guests who brought their perspectives, and just resonating a lot with the kind of complexity of this and the weight and the urgency. And I don't know, I think at this point, hearing from all my other community members, it seems like, Sam, I'm curious to hear what your team can come up with as making a decision in October. I also am thinking a lot about how, if we do go forward with it, we've said this before, but we can run the first year, I suppose, as a pilot and learn a lot from it. It's a lot of learning all at once. But yeah, I guess I'm feeling this. Hopefully we'll feel ready to decide something in October, or figure out a path where we have like a stepped decision-making approach.
This has been a really important conversation. So I'm glad that we took some time to have this conversation and to hear from the full committee on this. Appreciate, Faith, your framing on this conversation, because I think it's been very helpful. And I think everyone's comments are, have been very valuable and important of how to analyze this. And I think, we're in a climate crisis and we're just responding, reacting to an emergency. And obviously that anytime we're in a position where we're reacting to things, we're not performing our best. That's why I think it's so important and critical that we're planning, that we're preparing, we're working with planners and those who are not just making plans, but preparing for the challenges that we need. And that our role should be married with that, which is providing the investments that are critical and needed. And I think there are aspects about this that might not super align with our stated mission, but there are aspects that really do. I put a lot of weight on that. And I think community justice, community centered is really central and important for that. And I don't want to say I will override that for every other principle, but I think it's a good place for me to say that I do carry more weight on that. And I think the community deserves the response and leadership. And if we are tasked to provide that leadership, but through this investment, I think we should step up. And I think if we're going to step up to make that investment, I think we have the power and the voice to say other institutions should step up as well, and they should be listening to community groups like Community Alliance of Tenants, like the Coalitions of Communities of Color, and other organizations that are saying that we need to do more for low-income communities. I understand like this could be a burden, an energy burden for some, but those are problems for other folks to work and address, and that we might not solve those ourselves today. But that's shame on those institutions, because we're basically trying to solve their problems that they should have been able to solve for community for some time. But with that said, I think, I think we should, as a committee, take the time to meet again as many times as we need before the 6th. And my family will probably hate me for saying that, but I think community deserves that. We should expect some kind of weather climate event in the future, and we should not be caught flat-footed. And even that means we're in a scenario where we're picking the least worst scenario, then I think that's a decision we should be willing to take. But I will say that I'm thankful for the staff for the time and preparation on this. I will agree with my committee members that I think I think there could have been some more preparation work. Not to say you've not done enough or a lot, but I will say if this were a PCEF application, I think we put more rigor on committee members to with their responses and answers of how this will be project led, how it be managed. But I understand that we are doing the best with the time and the resources that we have. So I do want to appreciate the leadership here. So whenever we meet again, I think I'm comfortable to vote and move forward on this. I think just want to acknowledge, this is difficult to vote on without all the information, some of the questions that we would need answered. But I think there's enough here, at least for me to vote yes on.
Okay. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask that I don't know if I see any hands continue to. We're well past what we had promised to try to get you out by. So I think we've heard enough.
Robin's hand is up. I wanted to note.
Oh, I don't see the screen. Okay.
Sorry, it was left over.
I see Michael's hand up.
Oh, okay.
You see Michael's hand. I do see Michael's hand then.
So I guess because I understand that we need to start purchasing equipment in December, right? We are on, unfortunately, a tight timeline, and we are doing an emergency response. And I honestly believe if we save one person's life doing this, it's worth it, right? So I think it aligns with PCEF's goals. I think that we are waiting into territory that is very much us, but also very much should have been the responsibility of other government agencies within the city long before us. So we're now becoming an emergency response organization. And we are responding to a climate emergency, but we're responding in projects that take, 2-3 years to complete. And, tree planting that shows, has 20 years before it's fully active. We're trying to fix problems that anybody in climate science has said for decades were coming, and we've chosen to ignore them as a government as a whole. So now PCEF in Portland, it's going to come down to us right now to make a major investment in this through the failures of government. This is now become our responsibility in this time, for better or worse. So I would love to get back together possibly sooner than October 6th, but have a base RFP presented so that we know what we're voting on. And so if for me, I would like to see an RFP mostly fleshed out and sort of some more realistic numbers on household costs, on and on some of the other concerns that we've had. But I think that this falls inside PCEF's mission. And I would vote yes on it. I just don't feel comfortable voting yes on it today.
So that's what we're going to do. What we'll follow up with, folks, is we're going to do small group meetings with groups of 3 of you. I know that that's been productive before in a good way, just to be able to give you all opportunities to ask additional questions. And meanwhile, it's going to take us a couple of weeks to draft what we anticipate would be the application questions, in a simple application, a very simple application that we would ask for equipment distribution partners. So we will draft that so you all can see exactly what that is. What I just, in order to make sure we do have enough time to do that, because it is going to take that, we're going to aim to bring you all back potentially the 29th. I do want to just check in with the team afterwards. So we'll follow up on scheduling and see if it's the right date. Wednesdays have worked, so we may aim to bring you back on the 29th. If not, we'll work on at least small group meetings between then and bringing you back on October 6th, which is our next at least scheduled meeting. So if that works as a path, that what we'll either do is bring you back as a full committee on September 29th, in 2 weeks from now, with at least a draft to consider. If we don't have enough time to do that well enough, we will bring you all back on October 6th to discuss that. But in between then, we'll at least, and in either scenario, we'll schedule small group meetings so we can give you all space to ask further questions and review some of the content more. Your hand raised.
Yeah, just in the spirit of not letting perfection being the enemy of progress here. Like, I think Michael, like, is there? I think is that just to understand, like, would having an RFP, would there be a scenario where, like, voting on this and then reviewing and voting on the RFP, would that satisfy that as well? I just want to make sure I understand the reviewing the RFP. Like, I think, I do want to be sensitive to just how much time it takes for an RFP to get crafted. Like, I think we're just going through a public comments portion right now on an RFP process. It takes a little longer. So, I think I just want to just based on history here, it seems like these things takes time and care. But just want to get, I think, to the root value here on your request on reviewing an RFP, and just want to know as a fellow committee member what the root value here is for you.
I guess I'm looking at the timelines that I've seen in the memo, which is December, they want to be ordering equipment. We have November, October. I mean, the timeline is so crunched here. This is such an emergency response at this point that that it seems like we have to have an RFP ready to go out the door here. I don't know, Sam, you can tell me what date you need an RFP out, but I'm guessing it's going to be like beginning of October anyway.
This is a complicated piece of it, is organizations are thinking about this. And so you're going to have organizations that may apply for our primary RFP as well as this. And so we do want it to overlap, at least on the organizations expressing interest, with our regular RFP window, because a proposal addressing heat response, I could just say on sort of this concept, would not likely do well in the regular RFP, given the way we've structured their criteria. And so that is partially where we know that folks are thinking about it, given how present and how top of mind these incidences have been. And so going out to get equipment distribution partners at the same time and having that offering in parallel with the other RFP would make a lot of sense for us. It's something we're going to have to explain, but it would make a lot of sense. Alternatively, the equipment purchasing partner is an entirely different role. And that in some ways is probably the more critical timepiece, because that is the entity that is going to be purchasing the equipment. And we would come back, either way, we are going to come back to you with that, since we are not asking that. We suspect that there is a handful of organizations that can truly play that role. And so that's a conversation that we were expecting to come back to you all as well in October to talk about that particular role. So I think if we're able to come back and make a decision either on the September 29th, October 6th, I want to check in with the team. I think either of those dates we can make work. I think we can. It's a crunch with other work around, but I think we can do that and come back on those dates and give you all something a little bit more that you can review and at least see in more concrete terms what it is. I want to focus, the focus of this would be simplicity. And so you'll at least be able to see that and see it in more fullness. I'm seeing general nods, and given the timing, and I've got Sarah, come here. I've got a little one here that is ready for me. I think I'm hoping that we can call it and come back in a couple of weeks. Is that I'm giving the nods and giving the time it is. If we can do that, then I'd love to move forward with that idea.
I just want to thank everybody for coming and participating in this. I appreciate everybody's input.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, committee members. And I know that we said we'd keep to it an hour, so thank you for giving us the extra time, and I hope you all have good evenings.
Great to see you all. Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.